Bobby Bones here with news on the Top Shelf Country Cruise, setting sail February 27th to March 6th, 2026. It's not just a cruise. It's a country music experience at sea, an amazing lineup of performers. Well, we're going to be there. The Bobby Bones Show, I'm going to be there. Keith Urban, Lee Bryce, Scotty McCreery, Parma Lee, Leanne Rhymes. It doesn't end there. We'll also be stopping in stunning destinations along the way. Go to TopShelfCountryCruise.com to book any available stateroom. Gotta hurry, though. These spots are filling up fast.
Out here, it's not only the amazing views, but the way time stretches out a little longer and how the breeze hits just right at the summit. With All Trails, you can discover nature's best with over 450,000 trails around the world. Download the free app today.
Hello and welcome to mini episode number 457 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And I have 3 spooky stories for you today. And the last story comes from the 31st of March 2025. And story number 1 comes from Maddy. I originally sent in a story about a mimic, which was featured in mini episode 380. And as I said then, most of my weird experiences centre around my mother. We've heard so much about freaky kids, but awareness also needs to be raised about freaky parents. Everywhere my mum has lived seems to be haunted. But personally, I think she's a magnet for these things. When I was around 12, we lived in a lovely little house that, despite the spooky things that happened there, felt very homely. One of the strange things that happened quite frequently was my mum's favourite necklace would go missing, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. And despite turning the house upside down looking for it, she wouldn't find it, but it would reappear in random or obvious places. This necklace wasn't expensive or even really sentimental. It was just her favourite, and she'd wear it every day when it wasn't missing. It was a silver chain that had a large Gothic cross with black stones on it. One night I had a friend staying over, and we had gotten onto the subject of my mum's necklace being missing. This particular time it had been missing for nearly 2 months. As my mum was explaining to my friend how it disappears and reappears and it must be a ghost that keeps taking it, we started hearing the wind chimes in the dining room, probably just a breeze. At this, my mum asks out loud, half joking, half not, "Hey, if it's you that took my necklace, could you bring it back please?" I noticed after a minute or so that my mum was starting to look a bit concerned. So I asked her what was wrong. And she told me that she had taken the wind chimes down in the dining room and thrown them away, so we shouldn't be able to hear them. Despite feeling the urge to poo my pants, I decided to be brave and suggest that we all go and check what was happening. As we approached the dark dining room, the sound of the wind chimes suddenly stopped, which was somehow scarier than hearing them. We entered the now silent dining room and saw nothing and no one, until we looked at the table. And there, placed perfectly, was my mum's necklace that had been missing for 2 months. Another time in that house I was home alone while everyone was out shopping, and I could hear one of the bedroom doors upstairs creaking with the wind. So I went upstairs, closed the window that was causing the door to move, and shut said door, along with any others that were open, and then returned downstairs. After a few minutes, I heard an almighty crash from upstairs, which shook the house. Once again, despite the urge to poo my pants, I decided to go upstairs and see what had perhaps fallen over to make that sound. I reached the top of the stairs to find every single door on that landing open. Knowing full well that I had shut those doors a few minutes before, I noped out of there and went to a friend's house until after I knew everyone else was home. Right, Maddy, welcome back. First of all, I want to know, and this is something I am genuinely fascinated with. It probably takes up far too much space in my brain. When things go missing, so things like your mother's necklace, when things like that go missing, where do they go? Are they in another dimension for that period of time? If so, is that just like a room of requirement where it's just full of shit that people have lost? Or, lost in inverted commas. It just lives in that room until such time as whatever it is that took it is like, well, I'm going to bring it back now and leave it on the dining room table. Or does the entity move that item around the house? So if you got up in the middle of the night, would you see the necklace floating from one hiding place to another before it decides to leave it back on the dining room table? Where does it go? That's what I want to know. And for those of you who are busy typing, tip and tapping about the fact that I say necklace, apparently weirdly, I know. It's just the way I've always said it. I didn't know I said it weirdly until I've said it on the podcast, and I always get messages from people saying, do you know you say necklace weird? Well, no, I didn't, but now I do. And whatever this is, whatever this entity is that's in the house, it feels very, I would say, attention seeking. And I would find that very difficult, knowing that you had been up the stairs, closed all the doors, and then you hear that crash and go up and every single door on the landing is open. Oh, I would do this. I would nope out. I'd be like, I'm not arsed with this actually. But it is definitely very attention seeking. And I would say mischievous in a way. It doesn't make it any less frightening, granted, but it doesn't, it sounds like it's something that's like, oh, this is what's going to, this will really wind her up. And in a way, I respect it. And our second story today comes from Jandy. When I was 10 years old, my parents and I moved into a rental property, which they then purchased. We were not told anything about the history of the home. I remember being very young and having a vivid, repeating nightmare for about a decade. I dreamed of having a blinding light, like 100 suns, shone into my eyes. I could not see anything around me, and I would have to feel my way around as I walked. This dream happened over and over for years, until one day I had to have an unplanned eye surgery as an outpatient, and when I left the clinic, it happened. All I could see, even with sunglasses and a dressing over my eye, was blinding light. I could not find my car. I had to feel my way around the parking lot, touching all the cars until I found mine. I got in, but could not drive, and I had to call a friend to pick me up. After that day, I never had that dream again. A few weeks later, a friend of the family came to visit with their little boy. He began to complain that he also couldn't see and was blinded by light. He walked around yelling, I can't see, I can't see. His mother decided to have him spiritually cleansed because it was obvious that this was not physiological but something paranormal that was happening. Some of the weird things that happened were like items being misplaced, stolen or moved, disembodied voices that came from nowhere. At 19, I got engaged. My ring literally disappeared in the house and I never found it. But it was for the best. I broke it off because my fiancé became very violent and I had to get a restraining order. Years later, while sweeping in my bedroom, I found an antique engagement ring. It was not the one that had disappeared, but looked Art Deco, like something from the 20s. I later found out through an acquaintance that the woman who originally lived in the house was shot and killed by her jealous and violent husband. I really think her ghost was trying to warn me and keep me from the same fate she endured. As for the ring, I am thinking that it was hers. One morning I experienced the most horrifying event. I remember seeing the window shade was half up, the door to the room was slightly ajar. I was frozen to the bed. I looked up and a hag-like thing was floating right over me. It was holding me down and I could not move my arms or my legs. When it finally let go of me, it dropped onto the bed with a thud and ran out the door. I literally felt it bounce off the bed and heard it scatter out of the bedroom. The feet sounded like claws as it ran. I got straight up and ran to the kitchen where my parents were, and I asked them if the cat was in the house, and had it been in the bedrooms. I tried to debunk what happened, but there was no cat in the house. They looked at each other and then at me like they knew something I did not. My mom began a caregiving business in the home, and she hired my aunt to help her with the elderly patients. One morning, while caring for a patient, my aunt screamed for help and ran out of the room. She told my mom to look at her forearms. An unseen force had grabbed her by the wrists and shook her. It left red marks on her arms, and my mother said when she looked at my aunt she was pale and her facial features looked very different. My mom then said that the spirit, or whatever it was, tried to jump from my aunt to her and attack her, but she felt the energy go through her body and leave. We saw many figures walking around the property, just out of the corner of your eye. Doors opened and closed, etc. It thrived on chaos and made living there unbearable. One night at around 2 a.m, I heard a blood-curdling scream outside my window. It sounded like a woman was being killed or tortured. I was scared shitless because I am a chicken at heart, and I was not going to move the curtain to see what was happening outside. As always, my mother heard the screams and came to see what was the matter. She looked outside and saw our neighbour sweeping his yard. And no lie, the neighbour had died 2 weeks earlier. The same thing happened 2 nights in a row. The second night I prayed that it would stop, and I voiced out loud that I was not going to give it any attention, so he better stop it. It worked, and that was the last time I heard screaming. My television would turn on every day at 4 p.m. and tune into the old Baywatch, same channel and time every day. My friends witnessed this many times, and I just shrugged my shoulders. There was no timer or anything like that on the TV. It was late 90s, early 2000s. When I moved out, I took my TV with me, and it never happened again. We moved to a new house and on to new hauntings. But that's another email. The beginning part of that story genuinely blew my mind. Like, you're having this dream over and over again of a blinding light being shone into your eyes and having to feel your way around as you walked, right? But then it actually happens. It happens to you because you have eye surgery. That must have been an absolutely insane moment when you realised, oh my God, this was the dream that I've been having all that time. Like, I wonder, was that you having like a premonitory dream, or maybe the house trying to warn you that this was coming? It's just such a crazy thing to happen. And I would be curious to know whether or not that little boy who wandered around saying, no, I can't see, whether he had unexpected or unscheduled eye surgery at any point in his life, or will go on to have unexpected eye surgery at any point in his life. And I also think it is fascinating that your engagement ring went missing, and then you find this woman's engagement ring. I mean, if it's Art Deco and it's an antique engagement ring, and then you find out that this woman was shot by her jealous, violent husband, maybe the spirit of this woman was like, I am not watching this happen again. And I wonder if opening up the home as a care home sort of welcomed in other energies, because you're opening your home to other people, and people come with histories, ideas, emotions that potentially could attract other things to your house. And that moment for your aunt must have been so terrifying, to be grabbed by something that you can't see, hard enough for it to leave marks. You know, and then your mom seeing that her facial features looked different. That must have felt absolutely terrifying. And I do wonder why the blood-curdling screams accompanied seeing your neighbour. Or was that just some sort of weird paranormal coincidence? Oh, all in all, it's very strange. Today's episode is brought to you by Hormone Harmony. You were probably told that your health starts in your gut. But if you're a woman, it starts with your hormones. And I can tell you from experience that when your hormones are off, everything is off, including digestive issues, mood, energy levels, weight management, and so much more. Hormone Harmony is a game changer for women struggling with hormonal imbalances that leave them exhausted both physically and mentally. It only contains science-based ingredients that bring back comfort, energy, clarity, confidence, and a sense of balance. Happy Mammoth, the company that produces Hormone Harmony, is famous for its zero compromise policy. No GMOs, artificial fillers or flavours or any other junk. Only science-backed ingredients in amounts that are clinically proven. The company surveyed 1,831 women to see how Hormone Harmony helped them. And the results are pretty mind-blowing. 86% of women started losing weight, 77% say it improved their mood, and 100% said they're feeling like themselves again. Hormone Harmony has over 50,000 raving reviews from women all over the world, with 98% of them saying they'd gladly recommend it to their family and friends. You can try Hormone Harmony risk-free and get 15% off your first order with code GHOSTPOD at checkout. That's code GHOSTPOD for 15% off your first order.
Bobby Bones here with news on the Top Shelf Country Cruise, setting sail February 27th to March 6th, 2026. It's not just a cruise. It's a country music experience at sea, an amazing lineup of performers. Well, we're going to be there. The Bobby Bones Show, I'm going to be there. Keith Urban, Lee Bryce, Scotty McCreery, Parma Lee, Leanne Rhymes. It doesn't end there. We'll also be stopping in stunning destinations along the way. Go to TopShelfCountryCruise.com to book any available stateroom. Gotta hurry, though. These spots are filling up fast.
Out here, it's not only the amazing views, but the way time stretches out a little longer. How laughter bellows louder among friends, and how the breeze hits just right at the summit. With All Trails, you can discover and experience the best of nature with over 450,000 trails worldwide and navigation right at your fingertips. Find your outside with All Trails. Download the free app today and find your next outdoor adventure.
And our final story today comes from Hannah. I don't know if you remember a story from mini episode number 257, The Three Knocks, in May 2023. There was a story about seeing the meat hook in the closet during a tour of a house in Atlanta, Georgia. Well, my mom sent that one in, and I was the little girl with her, and I remember almost everything I saw and felt in that house. I wanted to give you a small update about the house. As far as I know, nothing fishy went on in there. I went through some old records and news clippings and saw no red flags that I would associate with a haunted house, no murders or suicides, and the house itself isn't particularly old. As my mom said in her submission, we live right around the corner and don't feel any of the heaviness that we felt when we were touring it. Even when we were still on the property, but outside of the house, we felt as though nothing was wrong. But when we went inside, it felt like we were lost to time. I remember walking through an unfinished basement and looking up to my mom, whose hand I was holding, only to see that her hand was attached to nothing. Her body lost in the darkness. Then I remember being in that bedroom and seeing a meat hook, which is weird, because why would that be there? Sometimes I think I remember a man being there, but sometimes I think that's my imagination. I was only 6 or so after all. Anyway, I don't really want to spend a lot of time talking about a story my mom already submitted. I have my own scary story. I don't like going out to look for trouble, but as a student of history who hikes in her free time, sometimes I just happen to come across old and scary things. I found something crazy yesterday, by complete surprise, when I was hiking on my college campus in the mountains of North Georgia. As you can probably tell, I believe in the supernatural. My mom and I do, but I think my dad thinks we're being ridiculous. I've seen strange, shadowed figures in the mountains of Scotland, and I've heard disembodied voices in my dorm room. I often get the heebie-jeebies and get the hell out of places that trigger my flight senses. In my last year at Berry College, which is a small liberal arts school in a town called Rome in northwest Georgia, we have 88 miles of hiking trails, and I, as part of my senior year bucket list, wanted to hike them all. However, Bury is host to a number of freaky-ass ghost stories. For example, during World War II, a female student allegedly hung herself in the bell tower of one of the dorms after she received word that her sweetheart died in the service. And you can see her ghost and feel her presence if you go up to the bell tower at night. If you're standing outside the old administration building, you can allegedly see the school's founder, Martha Bury. She died in 1942. We also have an entity called the Green Lady, which a lot of people think is the spirit of a girl who was killed by her boyfriend when he accidentally ran her over with his car in heavy fog in the 1980s. Sometimes at night, people will look in the rearview mirror and see the Green Lady sitting in the back seat of their car. Another time, the Green Lady allegedly helped the track coach find a missing freshman who had gotten split up from his group and lost in the woods. Over the years, lots of people have done stories about our ghosts. It's really interesting to go to a school with this much lore, and it's not really something many people expect from a small school in a small town. Bury is somewhat mountainous, but I wouldn't consider this area to be part of Appalachia. However, I think you should be cautious of the nature and whatever else is in the woods, no matter where you find yourself. Bury has miles and miles of dense and dark woods intermittently split up by trails and roads. It doesn't help that a lot of Bury's trails have relatively no foot traffic, or any traffic really. I walked for 7 miles and saw not a single soul. I set a goal for myself. Walk to O'Brien Gap, which is about 4-ish miles, maybe more from where I parked the car. I got about 3 miles in on O'Brien Gap Road and checked my Google Maps to see where I was in comparison to the rest of the campus, how far I've gone and how much longer I had to walk. I'm playing with the map and see that there's a church about 30 minutes down the trail, so I wouldn't be going out of my way if I went to check it out. Now, before you say anything, Bury is a primarily Christian school with so many churches on such little campus. On top of that, Bury has 2 campuses, the main campus where almost everybody lives and goes to school, and the mountain campus, which is where the stables are, more trailheads, and some historic buildings from Bury's and Rome's early days. It's also where the Windshape campus is, which is where all the kids on religious-based scholarships live. So I figured this church was used by those Windshape students because I had practically walked to Mountain Campus at this point, and the church seemed generally well connected on my map. I eventually came to a fork in the road. I could go straight, where Bryan Gap Road continued, to the right where CCC Road began, or to the left, which would take me to the church. At this point, I was tired and thirsty, so I figured that I would go check out the church and then turn around and go home. I went left and was greeted with 2 empty buildings in a state of disrepair, an old pavilion and a graveyard situated in a clearing, surrounded on all 4 sides by woods. The buildings freaked me out. One was the church itself, which looked just like an old-fashioned one-roomed Southern Baptist church. But the front door had a big iron gate on it. The windows were boarded up, and the sign by the front of the building, where it's supposed to say Mountain Springs Church, was missing. There was a second building on the far side of the clearing, which upon further research was the groundskeeper's house. This building had iron bars on its broken windows, and its doors looked like they were about to fall off their hinges and crumble into dust. I figured this place saw enough foot traffic, because the flowers on the gravestones were pristine, and there were fresh enough tyre tracks around in the mud, as well as a fairly new ADT sign warning intruders that the buildings were equipped with alarms. It took me more than an hour to walk here, I thought, and I also wanted to learn a little bit more about my schools and the area's history. I never knew this was back here. I took some pictures that I thought encapsulated the creepiness of the area and sent them to my friends, and I walked around for a bit because I thought there was a trail that led through the graveyard and out to the rest of the mountain campus. I was wrong. and ended up having to walk back through the graveyard, past the creepy buildings and back the way I came. The flowers ended up being plastic ones, bleached by the sun. When I made it back to the fork in the road, instead of walking back down O'Brien Gap, which was the road I came in on, I took CCC Road in an attempt to change the scenery a bit. It was still the same length as O'Brien Gap and ended up at the same trailhead anyway, so it didn't matter to me. For context, CCC stands for Civilian Conservation Corps. During the Great Depression, FDR established that programme, sending young men across the US to build infrastructure. Rome received a lot of that support, including this particular road. I had been walking down CCC Road when I got a text from my friend Lauren, a Rome local. She told me that the pictures I took looked like CCC Road, the end of it, and I was like, yeah, how did you know? The next text she sent literally shook me to my core. She just said, uh-oh. I'm walking home, thinking maybe I trespassed by accident or something, and then she sends a whopping second text. You know, that used to be a devil worshipping church. That is so not what I wanted to hear in that moment. She told me that the church is one of the most haunted places in Rome, that it's a haunted attraction for locals to visit on Halloween, and that there used to be remains of burnt crosses and the like. Campus law enforcement and passers-by also find dead animals on what appear to be altars on the inside of the church, and sometimes satanic symbols painted in red on the exterior walls. After I got home, when I looked up Mountain Springs Church, Rome, I saw that quite a few people reported weird and downright frightening things, like organ music coming from inside or cries for help from the graveyard. I didn't hear any of those things, but I certainly didn't feel welcome. When I first walked up, I thought I saw a figure in the window of the groundskeeper's building, but then I got a little bit closer and realised that it was broken glass and chastised myself for freaking myself out. I'm known to do that. Now I'm wondering, the glass was broken in the shape of a pair of horns. And even before I knew of the church's association with the devil, I made that connection for a brief moment. When I got home and Googled the place, I saw an article that mentioned a Berry grad who explored the place with her husband. She said that on her hike, yellow butterflies followed them until they reached that fork in the road, where I decided to turn left to see the church. All of a sudden the butterflies were gone and they were pelted by bees and wasps. This I can account for. I noticed almost no bees or wasps until I was in the vicinity of the church and on CCC Road. When I turned off CCC Road, I didn't notice any more wasps or bees. Although I didn't have the luxury of being surrounded by gorgeous yellow butterflies, these tiny black butterflies fluttered along with me for the most part. I looked at the reviews for the Mountain Springs Church online. There is only one. And it says, if you find yourself here, then you deserve to be here. Which totally freaked me out, because it sounds horrifically ominous and awful. However, on further inspection, this guy leaves a lot of reviews and most of them are bad ones, so I think he just likes to fuck around on the internet. Even CCC Road, the road I was walking on in that moment, was a part of Rome's haunted history. Apparently there's a missing bridge. You can count 7 bridges walking in, but only 6 when you walk back out. I was not about to sit there and count effing bridges, so I took the first fork in the road I saw to get me the hell off the haunted road. If you look up Berry's Wildlife Management Area, which regulates the hunting in the area, on Google Maps, they have a location at the end of CCC Road. I think its location is completely random because the Wildlife Management Area encompasses so much of the campus, and there's no building in the location Google Maps says. But the WMA has 2 reviews. One says, hope I'm able to get a permit to hunt here soon. And another that says, weird place for a haunted road. How is it that everyone knew this place was haunted except me? What takes away from the hauntedness of the church is the fact that they have an active, though shoddy, website that says that they still do services once a month in warm weather for the families of the people who used to live in the area and attended this church. What made me especially sad is how they said the congregation's donations pays for vandalism cleanup. So all the pentagrams, I'm assuming random people spray paint on the walls, rather than the restoration the buildings clearly need. So I'm a little sympathetic. I can't really find anything about the Satan worship itself. At this point it all seems like hearsay, but winding up there scared the shit out of me anyway, and I had this feeling that I was in the wrong place and that I needed to hit the road. CCC Road and the church itself have an interesting history, but I feel like I've been going on and on, so I'll leave it at my experience. I'm not really one to go out in search of paranormal trouble, or any trouble for that matter. But I recently caught wind that my next hike has a resident ghost. A man who follows hikers on a horse trail on Bury campus, glares at them, and disappears into the wind. This hike has been on my bucket list for some time now, so I guess I'll just have to brave the ghosties. I kind of love it when members of the same family send in stories, right? I just love it. There's, first of all, the verification. Not that I disbelieve anybody's stories, but you know what I mean? It's nice to hear it from somebody else's perspective, but also because I imagine you guys listening together or discussing episodes, and I think that's a really lovely thing. I really do think that Bury College sounds like an amazing place with such a rich history of storytelling, because that's how we keep those stories alive, is storytelling. And I think it's just so important. It's a bonding thing. It's about sharing history and sharing culture, and I think storytelling is really important. And you end up with these gorgeous, rich stories about these, you know, campuses that are full of history. And you have, you know, stories about, for example, you know, the girl whose lover was killed at war. You have the story of the Green Lady, which is great. It sounds like a great phantom hitchhiker story. The story of the man who follows you on horseback. Like, those are great stories. And like you said yourself, Hannah, I fundamentally don't believe that devil worshipping happens in the way that we see it in these kind of stories. You know, I think that what does happen is that local young people dare each other to go out to these places and they spray paint what they think is like weird and spooky things on the walls. And I also think that stories of animal sacrifice are generally kind of to be taken with a pinch of salt or exaggerated. Like, it's very possible that people, you know, dared each other to go to the church, and in the church they found remains of an animal that was there naturally or dragged in by a predator or whatever. And people go, oh, there was animal sacrifice happening in that church. But that doesn't make the land and the area any less spooky. And I find it absolutely amazing that you just sort of came across this place, you know, as a little side quest on your hike. You were like, oh, well, this is weird. But genuinely, if I was on a hike and a person who was local to the area sent me a text message going, uh-oh, in response to a place that I sent a picture of, save it until I get home. Save it until afterwards. Save it until I'm not slap bang in the middle of devil country. And I also love the unnecessarily ominous nature of the review that says, if you find yourself here, then you deserve to be here. I love that. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Maddy, Jandy and Hannah for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story came from the 31st of March 2025. And if you'd like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website, reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you can get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
Lies, exploitation, and the American dream turned nightmare. This is Big Sugar, a deep dive into the inner workings of the sugar industry. I'm Celeste Headley, and in a new podcast, I'm investigating a true crime story like no other about the men who risked their lives to cut sugarcane. In Big Sugar from iHeartMedia, Imagine Audio, and the teams at Weekday Fun and Novel, I'll unravel a decades-long fight to get justice.
If they were right, then these workers were owed tens of millions of dollars in extra wages.
Listen to Big Sugar wherever you get your podcasts.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.